The story follows Goon, a man struggling with depression and trauma from his past. He's haunted by painful memories, but one day he meets a beautiful lady who uses her memory eraser experiment on him and gives him a fresh start. The story opens on an aeroplane, where Goon looks sad and envious of his younger brother, Shin. He wasn't always like this. His resentment towards Shin started after a childhood incident. Goon used to be Korea's top tennis player, but during an important match, he got badly injured while trying to protect Shin from harm. This injury ended his tennis career, and he lost everything he had worked for. Then, Goon meets Ju, a psychiatrist, on the plane. She notices something strange about his behavior and feels a bit uncomfortable. When Goon tries to point out something on her face, she awkwardly tells him she has a boyfriend, hinting that he should keep his distance. However, Goon insists, and Ju eventually checks her reflection and sees lipstick smudged on her face. Suddenly, the plane jolts, causing Goon to fall onto her. Ju's first reaction is to quickly grab her laptop, which contains very important data, preventing it from falling. As Goon lies on the floor, he experiences a sudden flashback of Ju from when she was a child. Though he isn't sure if they've met before, the memory feels strangely familiar. At the airport, Goon arrives with his brother, Shin, and their father. Goon leaves first, and people mistake him for Shin, who is now the top tennis player in Korea. Once they realize he isn't Shin, they rush off in the opposite direction. This deepens Goon's frustration, as he feels overshadowed by his brother. Walking ahead, Goon accidentally bumps into Ju again, but they both choose to ignore each other. Now, Shin seems to be using Goon for his own advantage, which drives Goon further into despair. Later, Ju is seen giving a presentation to her senior colleagues. She discusses her experiment on a rat, where she successfully erased its bad memories, rendering it unable to recall anything other than good memories. Ju explains that her goal is to use this research to help people erase painful memories from their lives. This experiment is exactly what Goon has always dreamed of, an escape from the traumatic memory that destroyed his life. He longs to erase the past and start over. Back at home, Goon tries to live independently, refusing to rely on Shin's money. But he feels abandoned and unloved by his family, believing they value their dog more than him. Meanwhile, Ju discovers that Goon accidentally took her bag at the airport. She tries calling the number on his tag, but he doesn't answer. Goon meets Seon, the current national tennis player, who instantly recognizes him as the legendary player he once was. This recognition makes Goon feel happy, knowing that people still remember him. When Ju finally reaches Goon by phone, she tells him they've accidentally switched bags at the airport. However, Goon brushes it off and tells her to just drop her address, cutting the call abruptly. This infuriates Ju, as her bag contains something very important. At work, Goon's superiors belittle and mock him, causing him to feel even more anxious and sad. As stress builds up, he begins to experience severe pain in his wrist. Overcome with anxiety, Goon rushes to the hospital, where he encounters Ju again, this time as his doctor. Knowing she's a psychiatrist and not a neurosurgeon, Goon demands a different doctor, but Ju insists that the pain is psychosomatic with no real injury and refuses to give him painkillers. Frustrated, Goon storms out. However, when Ju realizes his name and recalls he's the man she switched bags with, she leaves him a voice message. Meanwhile, Goon's brother, Shin, meets Dr. Han, a specialist involved in the memory eraser experiment. After learning about the procedure, Shin begins to wonder if this could be a way to help Goon forget the painful memories that haunt him. At the same time, Ju is at the hospital, trying to catch their lab's experimental mouse, the only one to successfully have its bad memories erased. It becomes anxious and runs under a car, getting killed. Ju is furious and calls Goon worthless, claiming the mouse was more valuable than him, who Goon just crushed under his car. This deeply saddens Goon, pushing him to a dark place. Devastated, Goon attempts to end his life, but he is rushed to the hospital just in time. His brother, Shin, grows deeply concerned and consults with Dr. Han, asking if they can use the memory eraser procedure to remove Goon's traumatic memories. In the operating theater, Dr. Han secretly performs the memory eraser procedure on Goon, wiping out all of his painful memories, including his recent encounters with Ju as an adult. After the surgery, Goon sleeps for several days. When he finally wakes up, Ju is by his side. At first, she believes the memory eraser worked and assumes he's forgotten her. But to her surprise, Goon remembers her not as the woman he recently met, but as his childhood love. Overcome with emotion, he hugs her tightly, startling Ju. Goon's sudden declaration that Ju was his first love leaves her confused and uneasy. Meanwhile, Dr. Han and his team are pleased with the results of the surgery, thinking the memory eraser experiment was a success. When Goon reunites with his family, he playfully pretends not to recognize them, which initially worries them. However, when they ask him about his wrist injury, Goon seems genuinely confused, as if he doesn't remember it at all. Ju, on the other hand, is baffled by Goon's behavior. She can't understand why he remembers her as his first love, even though the memory eraser should have removed everything from his past. Disturbed by this, Ju begins to avoid Goon. With his newfound confidence, Goon seems reborn, full of energy and childlike enthusiasm. He He becomes determined to reconnect with Ju, whom he believes is his first love. One day, he impulsively pulls her into a storeroom, insisting that they talk. Ju, startled and uncomfortable, tells him she doesn't know him that way and begs him not to call her his first love. As Goon tries to convince her otherwise, they hear a girl nearby talking to her boyfriend on the phone. The girl hears a noise from inside the storeroom and becomes curious, attempting to open the door to see what's going on. Panicked, Ju asks Goon to hide in a laundry basket, fearing the awkwardness of being found alone with a male patient in a locked room. However, Goon refuses to hide. As the door opens, Ju quickly steps out, trying to act casual while shutting the door behind her, leaving Goon inside. Feeling disoriented yet confident, Goon returns home and takes a bath, feeling refreshed but confused by the gaps in his memory. Since he now only remembers the good parts of his life, he starts believing that he is still a successful tennis player and that he owns the family home. Meanwhile, Shin, his brother, arrives home and notices something odd. He finds Goon in his own room instead of his usual guest room. Realizing the fragile state of Goon's mind, Shin discreetly hides photos and trophies of his own tennis achievements under the table to avoid confusing or upsetting him. Their parents soon come home and are surprised to see Goon wearing Shin's clothes. His father scolds him for returning home without informing the hospital staff, but Goon, now full of misplaced confidence, acts dismissively. He behaves as though he is in charge, with no regard for anyone else's opinions, convinced that he's still at the top of his game. With this new mindset, Goon decides to head back to the hospital to see Ju, whom he believes to be his first love. Meanwhile, Ju is having a conversation with Dr. Han, explaining Goon's mistaken belief that she is his childhood love. Dr. Han, more concerned about the success of the memory erasing experiment and Goon's mental state, advises Ju to play along with Goon's fantasy for now, at least until they come up with a more permanent solution. After the conversation, Ju returns to her office, only to get a call from her mother. While she is talking, Goon suddenly appears. He overhears part of the conversation and smiles, thinking that she's talking to his future mother-in-law. He expresses concern that Ju has been overworking herself and taking such good care of him. As a gesture of gratitude, he brings her a drink, cheerfully thanking her for all she's done during his recovery. Ju, startled by his forwardness, feels torn between her professional duty and the emotional complexity of the situation. The next day, Sion, the national tennis player, hears that Goon was admitted to the hospital after a serious incident. Concerned, she visits him, and they start talking. However, Goon doesn't seem to remember her. Sion tries to jog his memory by asking about his lost gold medal from when he won as a junior international champion. This stirs something painful in Goon, and as he tries to recall his suppressed memories, the emotional strain overwhelms him, causing him to faint. Later, Ju learns from Goon's best friend, Bang, that Goon recently discovered his first love, Jian, is actually dating his younger brother, Shin. This revelation explains why Goon has blocked out memories of his first love and confused Ju for Jian. After meeting with her mother, Ju learns more about Goon's difficult past. She hears how Goon's family, particularly his parents, have treated him poorly ever since he sacrificed his own tennis career to save his brother. This deeply saddens Ju, and she visits a grave, possibly that of a loved one, to reflect on everything. Soon after, she finds Goon at a tennis court, visibly upset. To lift Goon's spirits, Ju lies and tells him that she is indeed his childhood first love. This lie brightens Goon's mood instantly. At that moment, a tennis ball machine fires a ball toward them, and Goon instinctively catches it with his right hand. A huge moment, as it signals his physical recovery and ability to use his hand again. However, Ju soon realizes the gravity of her mistake in pretending to be Goon's first love. Goon, now feeling emboldened by the thought that his first love has returned to him, decides to propose that they become a couple. Ju, feeling trapped, immediately rejects him, explaining that she's already in a relationship. Goon refuses to believe her, arguing that she works non-stop at the hospital and has no time for a boyfriend. Desperate to escape the situation, Ju claims her boyfriend is someone at the hospital. At that very moment, Ju's boyfriend Tae shows up, and Ju uses this as an opportunity to reinforce her story. Meanwhile, Shin meets with a police officer, who is investigating Goon's attempt to suicide case. The police find it suspicious that Shin was able to rescue his brother so quickly in such a short amount of time. This raises doubts about Shin's version of story, hinting that Shin is not telling the truth. But Shin's sponsor arrives there and manages to dismiss the investigation. While Ju is reminiscing with her boyfriend, Tae, about the special moments they've shared, including when he gave her an Eiffel Tower keychain, Goon becomes envious. His jealousy reaches a boiling point, and in a fit of frustration, he throws a sandal at Tae, which only serves to infuriate Ju. Curious and wanting to know more about Tae, Goon starts investigating. He soon discovers that Tae isn't as perfect as he seems. Apparently, Tae is a bit of a playboy, and the Eiffel Tower keychain wasn't as unique as Ju thought. He's given similar keychains to all their female staff members. This only deepens Goon's desire to protect Ju from Tae. Later, with Dr. Han unavailable, Shin meets with Ju. During their conversation, Ju notices Shin's meticulous behavior and learns that he suffers from OCD, always needing to appear perfect and live up to everyone's expectations, something that has been a burden throughout his life. Afterward, Goon persuades Ju to go on a dinner date with him, where he attempts to warn her about Tae, claiming he isn't a good match for her. Ju, however, shows Goon some of her texts with Tae, portraying him as caring and protective. Despite her reassurances, Goon tries to confess his own feelings for her. He reminds her of the time when she saved him from drowning years ago, and how he gave her his medal as a token of his gratitude. This revelation shocks Ju, as she momentarily recalls that incident from her past. Feeling overwhelmed, Ju returns home to rest, only to find her childhood friend, Jian, who has just returned from abroad and is staying with Ju's mother. The next morning, Goon notices Ju frantically searching for the Eiffel Tower keychain she lost the day before. He doesn't understand why she's so attached to such a cheap trinket, but for Ju, it holds significant sentimental value, and losing it feels like losing a piece of her heart. Goon, seeing how much it means to her, becomes even more determined to protect her and help her, even if she doesn't fully understand his feelings yet. Goon becomes increasingly frustrated by Ju's attachment to Tae, especially after learning that Tae is secretly seeing another woman. When Goon spies on Tae in his car with another girl, instead of recording the incident and showing it to Ju, he decides to let her discover the truth herself. But when he finds her still desperately searching for her lost keychain, Goon feels both shocked and disheartened. In an attempt to stop her from obsessing over Tae's token, he gives her a similar keychain he received from a nurse, pretending it's hers. Ju is overjoyed by finding the keychain, and begins walking toward Tae's car. Before she can discover Tae with the other woman, Goon intervenes, not wanting her to get hurt. At that moment, Tae shows up and takes Ju away, diverting her attention. Tae even requests Ju to work on something for one of his junior female staff members, leaving Goon angry and frustrated. Goon tries once more to warn Ju about Tae's unfaithfulness, but she brushes him off, not believing him. The next day, Goon takes another hospital staff member out to dinner and notices she is wearing the same gold Eiffel Tower keychain that Tae gave to Ju. This reminds the staff member, Songmi, of her own iron Eiffel Tower keychain that she recently lost, causing Goon to choke in disbelief. Meanwhile, Ju bumps into Shin at a convenience store, accidentally breaking the eggs he had just bought. This stirs up Shin's anxiety, as he has a big tennis match the next day and fears that he too will break down like the eggs. Ju tries to calm him, reassuring him that everything will be fine. They head to a nearby restaurant, where they order his favorite dish. But because of his strict diet, Shin asks Ju to eat the meal on his behalf while he watches. Ju complies, easing his nerves. As Ju helps Shin with his anxiety, he starts to develop feelings for her, complicating the situation further. The next morning, Goon wakes up and finds a bandage on the small injury he got from Ju. Furthermore, as he checks his tablet, he watches a video of Sion playing tennis and becomes intrigued. Inspired by her potential, Goon meets with Sion's sponsor and convinces her to resign from her current agency. Goon, who has decided to open his own sports agency, offers to sponsor Sion, making her a rising star in the tennis world. Meanwhile, Ju's senior doctors request that she submit the data report for her memory erasing experiment. Panic sets in as Ju remembers that the files are inside her luggage, which was accidentally left at Goon's house. She rushes to his home and, with the help of Goon's mother, retrieves the door password, hoping to find the files before it's too late. After a tense tennis match, Shin feels overwhelmed by stress and exhaustion. For the first time, he decides to do something for himself and heads home to rest. Meanwhile, Ju, searching through Goon's house, finally finds her luggage. Just as she's about to leave, Goon arrives back home and catches her. Despite his memory loss, Ju quickly explains that it's her bag, and she's just taking it back with his mother's permission. Goon, not wanting any trouble, lets her go. At the same time, Shin arrives home and unexpectedly bumps into his ex-girlfriend, Jian. The encounter stirs up old feelings, but Shin tries to stay focused on his tennis career and his newfound friendship with Ju. The next day, Goon meets with Sion, who looks discouraged and regrets her decision to quit her previous sports agency to join Goon's fledgling company. Sensing her doubt, Goon encourages her to stay strong, believe in herself, and work hard to succeed. Realizing he needs investors to keep his new agency afloat, Goon heads outside the hospital to seek funding. By chance, he runs into Ju, who becomes concerned about him wandering alone. Deciding to stick together, they head to a horse race, where they meet with a gambler who Goon hopes will invest in his company. The meeting is tense, but Goon is determined to convince the gambler to back him. Afterwards, Ju receives a call from her boyfriend, Tae, who asks her to return to the hospital and wait for him in a meeting room. Unbeknownst to Ju, Tae has a hidden agenda. He plans to steal the credit for her memory eraser experiment and convince other hospital staff to bring Goon into the operating theater. Tae intends to stage a fake memory eraser procedure on Goon to claim the success as his own. As Ju waits for Tae with a surprise in hand, she watches him come out of the operating room, chatting on the phone with someone. Curious, she follows him and catches him meeting up with Yeo, confirming her suspicions. Tae has been cheating on her. Heartbroken, Ju initially blames herself for pretending to be in love with Tae. When Goon finds out, he urges her to confront Tae and give him a piece of her mind, but Ju, upset, asks Goon to mind his own business and leaves. Wandering outside, she bumps into Shin, who notices her distress. He buys her a drink, but only brings one, so Ju takes a sip and then offers it to him, sensing he wants it too. This small, intimate gesture further fuels Shin's growing feelings for Ju. The next day, the hospital higher-ups decide to exclude Ju from the memory eraser project, devastating her. Meanwhile, Goon leaves the hospital permanently and focuses on building his own sports agency. As Ju goes on a date with Tae, she learns that he and his department have taken over her memory eraser research, making her feel even more sidelined. This realization makes Ju think about Goon and his importance in her life. She heads to his new office and asks for a job as a mental health counselor in his sports agency. The next morning, Goon finds Ju casually eating junk food for breakfast in his office. Despite the chaos, he rushes out to meet with Sion, leaving Ju behind. Determined to help, Ju follows Goon and convinces him to let her counsel Sion, who has been struggling with depression over her inability to join the national competition. Ju tries to cheer Sion up, but it becomes a personal challenge for her as well. Meanwhile, Shin is feeling anxious and wants to meet Ju, but she isn't available. He asks Dr. Han for her number, but Han refuses. In an effort to better understand tennis and help Sion, Ju reaches out to Shin, asking him to teach her the basics of the sport. Shin, seeing this as a dream come true, happily agrees and teaches her tennis. After their lesson, Shin walks Ju home and asks her out for a meal the next day, even getting her phone number. As they part ways, a suspicious man begins to follow Ju. Goon, noticing the situation, follows as well. Ju senses someone trailing her and starts to run, but Goon catches up to the man, only to discover it's Tae, who claims he's trying to apologize to Ju. Later, Shin visits Goon's office and is shocked to find Ju there. When Goon arrives, Shin realizes that Goon believes Ju is his childhood first love. Overcome with jealousy, Shin knows he can't do anything to hurt his brother but feels conflicted. He decides to leave and Ju, sensing his turmoil, follows him. She tries to explain to Shin that she needs to be with his brother all the time to monitor his behavior. Shin finds it amusing that she's taking such personal care of her patient, as if he's special to her. But she insists she's just doing her duty as a responsible doctor. To ease the tension between them, she suggests they have lunch together at the hospital the next day. Later, Shin comes home drunk, feeling sad because he knows the girl he loves probably won't be his. The next morning, Jiyeon gets a call from her dad, who insists she return to Europe immediately. However, she's worried since she still haven't found the person she's looking for, so she plans to visit her hometown. To afford the trip, she borrows some money from a kid. Just as she's about to leave, she spots Shin in his car. Jiyeon hops into his car and playfully demands a ride. Meanwhile, Ju is waiting for Shin at the hospital for their lunch. After a long journey, they arrive in a small village. Jiyeon decides to search through over 50 houses. Shin, on the other hand, gets roped into helping the local farmers in the field. After some time, Jiyeon is unsuccessful in her search and feels disheartened. Seeing her sad, Shin tries to cheer her up, but it only makes her angry. Frustrated, Shin decides to leave her behind and heads home. Jiyeon then calls Ju, asking her to arrange a taxi. Concerned, Goon offers to help and drives Ju to pick up Jiyeon. On the way, Goon suddenly stops the car, grabs a shovel from the trunk, and asks Ju to come out because there's a dead animal they need to bury before continuing. While they're working, Ju gets a call from Jiyeon, who tells her she found an old friend and is heading back home. Later, Goon drops Ju off at home, where she meets Jiyeon. The next morning, Ju tries to talk to Shin, but he brushes her off and walks away. He feels heartbroken seeing her with his brother, but he believes it's the only thing he can do for his family. Later, Goon goes to meet an Italian coach for Sion, but the interpreter goes missing. Sion becomes upset and calls Ju. Ju, knowing that Jiyeon speaks Italian well, brings her along as the interpreter. At the meeting, Goon's friend sees Ju and recognizes her. Since Ju once claimed to be Goon's first love, Goon's friend, Bang, asks her to stay away from him. Bang tells Ju how Goon saw his first love kissing his younger brother, Shin. Shin overhears this and insists nothing is going on between him and Ju, but Bang swears Goon saw them kissing. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, Goon begins to remember the painful moment when he saw his brother, Shin, kissing his first love, Jiyeon. The memory makes his head ache. This realization hits Shin too. He suddenly understands that Ju isn't Goon's first love, Jiyeon is. Goon quickly heads back inside to meet the Italian coach. To his surprise, Jiyeon arrives as the interpreter, but neither of them recognizes each other right away. As they wait for Shin, the coach becomes impatient. Meanwhile, Shin is still downstairs piecing things together. He realizes why Ju lied about being Goon's first love, but chooses to keep her secret. Shin and Ju sit down to talk. He opens up about how guilty he feels for unintentionally ruining his brother's promising tennis career and becoming a burden to him. However, Shin is relieved to know that Ju wasn't Goon's first love after all. When Goon calls Shin for the meeting, he ignores the call, happy to spend time with Ju. He even asks her to join him for dinner at a restaurant. Meanwhile, at the meeting, despite the coach being upset, Jiyeon manages to calm him down and reschedule the meeting. As she and Goon head home, she receives a call from Ju, and Goon overhears the conversation. Jiyeon gets into Goon's car and asks him to take her to a party. After drinking too much, she falls asleep in the car, which annoys Goon. Since she's Ju's friend, he messages Ju to come and pick her up, and quickly departs from there. Later, Goon becomes curious about his past and starts investigating. He discovers that he was admitted to the hospital by Shin after falling off a bridge. This confuses him because Shin had previously told him that he fell down some stairs and hit his head. When Shin finds out that Goon is digging into his past, he immediately calls Ju, asking her to stop him. Then, Shin rushes to the police station and takes the case report, claiming that the doctors don't want his brother to know about the incident. One night, Goon's parents show up at his place unexpectedly. He panics because Ju is asleep in his apartment, and he worries that his parents will think they are a couple. He tries to delay them, but they come inside anyway. Fortunately, Ju hides on the balcony, and when the moment is right, she sneaks out of the apartment. Shin, hearing about the situation, comes to check on her. Noticing that she's barefoot, he takes out a pair of shoes and a blanket for her from his car. Just then, Goon shows up with another pair of shoes, insisting that Ju return to the apartment since his parents have left. Ju wears Goon's shoes and heads back inside, which makes Shin a bit sad. Shin then goes to his sports agency, where the owner pressures him to renew his contract with the company. However, Shin seems distracted, thinking about Ju and whether he should leave the agency and join his brother's company instead. This angers the owner, but he soon finds a picture of Shin and Goon at the bridge. Suspicious, the owner starts following Shin. When Shin goes to his brother's company and rings the doorbell, the owner arrives shortly after. Goon, who overhears their conversation outside, listens in as they talk. The owner begins blackmailing Shin with a picture of him and Goon at the bridge. Goon doesn't see the photo because Ju, noticing his discomfort, takes him to the hospital after he starts feeling pain in his head again. Meanwhile, Shin is distressed after being blackmailed. Ju receives a call from him, asking for help. When she arrives at the bar, she finds Shin being bullied by two men. Frightened, she doesn't know what to do, but Goon suddenly shows up and saves Shin. However, because Goon is on medication, he falls asleep, leaving Ju to take both of them home by herself. After being blackmailed, Shin had to sign the contract with his previous sponsor Hong, and because of this, Goon loses his only investor, putting his business in jeopardy. To lift up his spirits, Goon bravely asks Ju to have dinner with him that evening. Though hesitant at first, Ju agrees. While Goon is waiting for her, Ju receives a phone call from Shin, who is feeling sad and asks her to come over, claiming he has Goon's diary, which could help her. Confused, Ju decides to meet Shin instead. At the restaurant, Goon is disappointed when Jiyeon shows up instead of Ju. They sit together, and Jiyeon mocks him for getting rejected. This makes Goon wonder if Ju said something to Jiyeon about him. After a few drinks, Jiyeon asks Goon about his first love, whom she assumes to be Ju. Goon admits that even though Ju doesn't remember meeting him 15 years ago, he still loves her, despite her not returning his feelings. Meanwhile, Ju meets Shin at a fancy restaurant. When she asks to see the diary, Shin insists she sit down and have dinner with him. During the meal, Shin confesses his feelings for her, but Ju doesn't pay much attention. When Shin asks if she has feelings for Goon, Ju insists that she's just his doctor and nothing more. However, this conversation makes her realize that she has actually fallen in love with Goon, though she's too afraid to tell him, and after spending some time with him, she returns back to Goon's apartment and finds Goon sitting alone on the couch. As a result, she starts avoiding him. Later, when the team heads to the athletes' village for training, Goon insists that Ju ride in his car. Shin arrives and asks Ju to ride with him instead. To avoid interacting with Goon, Ju chooses Shin's car. But Jiyeon appears and forcefully convinces Ju to ride with Goon instead. When Jiyeon finds out that her father has sent men to Korea to bring her back, she quickly jumps into the car and drives off with the others. Knowing that her father is searching for her, Shin sees this as the perfect opportunity to send Jiyeon away before Goon learns about his past. They stop by a mall to buy food and supplies, and while there, Shin secretly calls Jiyeon's father to reveal her location. After shopping, Shin mistakenly thinks Ju is sleeping in the car, so he decides to leave Goon behind, assuming Jiyeon is with him. However, Ju is actually with Goon, and Jiyeon is the one in the car with Shin. He realizes his mistake. Jiyeon is furious when she finds out about Shin's mix-up, and they start fighting. During the argument, Shin accidentally breaks her wish bracelet, which deeply upsets her, and she becomes even angrier. Meanwhile, Goon is heading back to the car with Ju. Feeling guilty, Shin tries to repair the bracelet and goes looking for Jiyeon, but he can't find her. Lost and heartbroken, Jiyeon wanders into the jungle and starts crying. Just when she feels hopeless, Shin shows up. Jian is overwhelmed by his sudden appearance. To distract her, Shin tells her to look away because he needs to go to the bathroom, but this is actually part of his plan to get rid of her. He secretly sends their location to her father so his men can come and capture her. However, things take an unexpected turn when something bites Shin, and he screams in pain. He overreacts, which makes Jian anxious and scared. She calls for help, worried that something serious has happened. As Shin starts to panic, he wonders if this is divine punishment for trying to get Jian caught by her father. Realizing his mistake, he decides to help her instead and confesses that he knows the person she's looking for. To Shin's surprise, Jian reveals that she's not looking for her first love, but for her real father. Fortunately for Shin, the bite was just from a bee and nothing serious. When Gun arrives with Ju, they try to leave for the athletes' village, but discover that their car is low on gas. Just as they lose hope of making it to the village on time, Sion arrives in her car, and they finally manage to join the others, saving Shin from elimination. During their free time, Gun takes Ju to the river where he met his first love, recalling how she saved him from drowning, and they share a kiss, but are interrupted by a passerby. Gun then brings her to his grandfather's house. Since his grandmother isn't home, they camp outside, cook together, and spend the night there. The next day, they return to meet the others. Meanwhile, Jian meets with her mother, who is upset about her search for her biological father, calling him a jerk who abandoned them. She demands Jian return home immediately. Fortunately, Gun overhears their conversation and introduces himself as Jian's employer. He explains that Jian is under contract with his company, refusing to let her leave suddenly, thus saving her from her mother's demands. Later, Gun experiences a sharp pain in his head as a childhood memory resurfaces. Terrified, he rushes to Ju and hugs her, which Shin witnesses from a distance. That night, Jian's mother meets with Ju, expressing her concern about Jian. During the conversation, Ju learns that Jian once dated Shin, which shocks her since they've been pretending not to know each other. This reminds Ju of when Bang mentioned Gun's first love, leading her to realize that Jian is actually Gun's first love. Gun waits outside to meet Ju, but she angrily confronts Shin instead, upset that he never told her the truth about his brother's first love. Gun arrives and Shin, noticing him, impulsively kisses Ju to make Gun jealous. When Gun becomes angry with him, Shin, in a fit of rage, pushes Gun into the pool, but Shin quickly jumps back in to save him from drowning. The next morning, Ju leaves Gun in Jian's care. Gun is heartbroken and wants to talk to Ju, but she coldly ignores his calls. Later, when Shin visits Ju's house, he meets her mother and niece. After an accidental spill, he changes into Ju's father's clothes. That night, when Ju returns home and finds Shin there, she calls him outside. Desperate to see her, Shin confesses his feelings, warning her that Gun doesn't love her but still loves his first love. Suddenly, Gun arrives with Jian on his back, heartbroken that Ju has been avoiding him and spending time with Shin. As Ju and Jian go inside, Gun is left deeply hurt. The next morning, Shin receives a threatening message from someone with a secret photo of him strangling Gun. Meanwhile, Gun goes to the police station to investigate the incident that caused his head injury and memory loss. He retrieves CCTV footage near the Han River. While Shin waits nervously at a cafe for the unknown blackmailer, his bodyguards apprehend a suspicious man. However, the stalker gets spooked and escapes. Soon after, the stalker posts the photos online, ruining Shin's image. He's charged with attempted murder and is forced to go into hiding. Gun, watching the CCTV footage, realizes it was actually he who started the fight with Shin. Racked with guilt over taking everything from his brother, Gun contemplates ending his own life. Although Gun still loves Shin as his brother, he tries to save him when they both fall into the river. In the end, Shin manages to save Gun. Shin, now on the run and hiding in a small tent, starts to miss Ju. He calls her from a phone booth, just to hear her voice. Ju, curious about where the call came from, traces the location. She quickly finds him at his campsite, where he is trying to cook. They share breakfast together, and afterward, they head to the beach. Shin is overjoyed that Ju came to see him. But suddenly, Gun shows up, hurt by the sight of them together. Ju tries to explain that it's a misunderstanding, but Gun has already seen them kiss at her house, and now spending time at the beach only deepens his hurt. The next morning, Ju receives a call from a doctor who informs her that her boyfriend, Tae, has learned everything about the side effects of their experiment. He threatens to reveal the information to Gun unless they hand over their project. Worried, Ju and Shin quickly go to meet Gun at his house, but he's already received a call from Tae. They rush to the hospital and eventually find Gun at the tennis court, where he unexpectedly kisses Ju. The following day, the charges against Shin are cleared when it's revealed that it was just a fight between brothers. Shin, tired of living up to everyone's expectations, decides to take a year off from tennis. Meanwhile, Ju is busy with her memory erasing experiment. Her first attempt was successful, and now she's developing a medicine to restore erased memories. Before proceeding with this, she decides to go on one last date with Goon. The next day, Ji-yeon's mother arrives at Ju's house, intending to take Ji-yeon with her before she meets her real father. However, during their journey, a strange man bumps into their car, and Ji-yeon runs away with him. It turns out that this man is her biological father. Though he behaves like a bit of a psychopath, innocent Ji-yeon doesn't fully grasp his dangerous intentions. Goon receives a call from Inspector Kim, who informs him that Ji-yeon's father is a wanted criminal involved in several murders and other crimes. Later, Goon gets another call from Tae. When they meet, Tae tries to hurt Goon emotionally by revealing a devastating truth. Tae claims that Ju, the woman Goon believes to be his first love, had used him as a test subject for her memory-erasing experiment. She pretended to love him just so she could observe the effects of the experiment. Although Dr. Han arrives, it's already too late to stop Tae from carrying out his plan. They proceed with the memory restoration experiment, and Goon begins to recall all the painful memories he had forgotten, one by one. This realization makes Goon furious, as he feels used as nothing more than a test subject. In his anger, he returns to his old destructive lifestyle. However, his family does their best to support him, showering him with love and care. Over time, they manage to win back his heart. But when Shin gives him a lost medal from his past, Goon still recalls Ju as his first love, leaving him confused and unsure of his past. Meanwhile, Ji-yeon finds herself trapped with her psychotic criminal father, who is willing to hurt anyone to keep Ji-yeon by his side. Later, Shin and Ju become suspicious when Ji-yeon mysteriously disappears after meeting her father. They decide to search for her. Ju then receives a strange message from Ji-yeon's phone, asking her to meet at the clinic. She heads to the hospital, where she runs into Ji-yeon's father, while Shin goes to check her father's house. There, Shin finds Ji-yeon locked inside. He quickly breaks the door and frees her. Meanwhile, Ju is being held by Ji-yeon's father. Before he can harm her, Goon arrives to protect Ju, and soon after, Inspector Kim shows up and arrests Ji-yeon's father again. The next morning, Ju wakes up in the hospital, and everything returns to normal. Goon regains his confidence, but this time without any experiments. After 3 years, Ju and Goon meet again at the same bridge where they first met as kids. That's the end of the series, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe.